Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. Our topic today is Sudan, where the main protagonists, both military and civilian parties, just signed an agreement for what is now called a democratic transition. This will be a rocky road, of course, as the political visions of those that ousted Omar al-Bashir are so far away from those that are still trying to salvage what can still be salvaged. In this agreement, the AU has played a major role, and today, Mohamed El Hacen Lebatt, its mediator, is our guest today. In an unflinching and unflagging way, protesters on the street are still asking for civilian powers and institutions. The story of the agreement that should be signed on the 17th of August is both challenging and uncertain. Hello, Mr. Lebatt, and thank you for being with us today. Now, the first question, which cannot be avoided here, is why and how were Sudanese military people able to go through those three institutions and accept to be somewhat short-changed? What actually induced them to accept something which is not necessarily that glorious to them?
I don't know if the military authorities who overturned Mr. al-Bashir's feel that they end the process in a state of inferiority. What is closer to reality and truth, in my view, is that the military who have taken power have taken it in the sense of giving support to the popular rebellion.
Giving support or trying to pacify the situation?
We mustn't forget that the coming together was not made in front of the presidential building nor in front of the assembly, but in the headquarters of the army. The revolutionaries, from the very beginning, to some extent, put themselves under the auspices of the army. When the army officers say, we intervened at the behest of the revolutionaries, they weren't trying to dupe anybody. It was certainly partly true, and this shows that there is a convergence here between the revolutionaries and the military.
However, when you listen to the civilians today, the protesters and the revolutionaries, one of the most federating slogans is civilians, civilian power. How can this convergence become reality?
At this point in time, the most federating slogan is satisfaction and joy at the agreement. So we must look to the future, not to the past. A few weeks ago, what you were saying was true, but there was discontent. Today, people are pleased to see for the nation that they are moving towards reconciliation, and there's a consent and consensus about working together in Sudan.
There is contention among what we might call the revolutionaries and the civilians, and there are also complicated situations marked by a rebellion, whether in Darfur, South Kordofan, and the Blue Nile region. Is this not likely to break the agreement apart? And you might say that I'm actually obsessed by the army, but will this not create a source of hope for the military forces? They might hope that all those tensions actually might happen, and they might seize power just as they would a ripe fruit.
I disagree with what a famous novelist said, that evil is natural in man and good is supernatural. I don't know if that's a good translation. My assumption is that the military and the civilian have wanted something good for their country, and it's on that basis that I have tried to build the idea of a consensus. What you're saying is true. The country has experienced wars, and 5 big rebel movements exist, armed movements. They have come together in what we call the Revolutionary Front. There's Mr. Nou, Mohamed Nou. So there are leaders, very important leaders, Chehorné, who leads very large armed movements. Some have accepted to join the forces of change and freedom. Others have preferred to stay on the sidelines until the civilian government exists before engaging in a discussion. So the political agreement and the constitutional decree both have planned negotiations between the transitional authorities and the armed movements.
Actually, when you think about it, and from what you did and what the various parties did, is no more, no less than making sure that the armed forces, the military, be subject to civilian power, ultimately. Now, let's assume that this happens and materializes. Will that be enough to be able to define a type of a future society for the benefit of Sudan? Or are you saying, no, this cannot be done right away, we cannot work on it right now, we'll work on it later on?
First of all, I'm pleased to hear you use or refer to what the parties have done. What has been done was not by me or others, the Sudanese parties did it, and I would like to emphasize that, not to flatter them, it's the truth. If I didn't have their cooperation, their collaboration, I would not be successful as a mediator. I'm not the only mediator. There's also Ethiopia, which is involved in the African mediation, which would not have been successful.
Were you competing with Ethiopian mediation?
Absolutely not. There is a single mediator, and it's under the auspices of the African Union, and it's normal that we should do this with our Ethiopian brothers. It's a country which is part of the African Union, and the first personality he met after the negotiations was me, and I discussed the solutions which I have started promoting. You asked me if the weaknesses of the agreement exist. No agreement in Africa has ever been applied without shocks on the way, and I know that this agreement, I have made my best efforts to support it. This agreement will face difficulties. There will be agreements within the agreement. There will be crises within the crisis. And I mentioned this with your colleagues from RFI the other day. We mustn't worry about that. It will follow its course. This doesn't mean that things are not working out and will not work out. The important thing is that we were in a very serious crisis due to factors such as foreign intervention, direct foreign interventions, direct interference, foreign interference, unfortunately, due to the crisis on the continent, a great diversity of domestic forces. You refer to armed movements, the diversity of forces of change, which are very diversified. If you try to count the number of organizations and political parties, there are 7 major components of opinion who have had the wisdom to designate one person to sign on their behalf. All these are factors of complexification. If we want to look at things from that's if you look at the glass as half empty. But if you want to look at the glass half full, it's a sign of dynamism, diversity, and it's very rewarding.
Another factor will be instrumental, in other words, making good on financial and economic engagements from the part of the international community. Do you have reasons to doubt? That's number one. And number two, do you have the feeling that there is a support, a genuine support to that Sudanese experience? An interesting one, actually. Or perhaps, I'm sorry, forgive me, but perhaps some countries or some regions might be saying perhaps at the end of the day would rather have an autocratic leader in Africa, a tyrant at the head of the country. This will guarantee stability. Do you feel there is such a dichotomy?
There are 2 parts to your question. The first fourth part is the position of the international community regarding the financing or the support for the economic, financial, and humanitarian aspects of the transition program, which are clearly stated in the political statement and also in the draft constitution. One of the features of this process, the African Union has succeeded in organizing the international community, Arabic, Muslim, or the Troika, or the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, or others. They have organized them as a source of support for mediation by the African Union, as well as our Ethiopian brothers, and this has made it possible to keep them informed of the truth and not through anecdotes in the press, and to ensure their support and the guidelines of this support, which we wish to clarify. And this has resulted in a good relationship between this contact group or support group and the mediators. So today the problem is we will have to act quickly to support the agreement. If it is not economically, financially, and militarily supported, there are very terrible humanitarian problems. This is one of the possible reasons for the collapse of the agreement. That's why I am saying to all the international partners, your responsibility in the success of the agreement is to support us today for the engineering, for the inventiveness, for the implementation, but also the application. It will be your role, and we will be there to remind you of this, and we will be there to strengthen and intensify the advocacy of this support. And I must say that until now, I believe that I have been heard. The President of the Commission of the African Union, who will be signing, I'm sure, will insist on this aspect, particularly, which he will express the availability of the African Union.
Thank you, Mr. El Hacen Lebatt, and thank you for being with us. So let's welcome the Solomon, and where's that for both Sudan and all the others. Thank you for being with us on France 24. The news goes on and never stops on our network. Thank you.